Okay, so this is Orgo Lesson 4, and today we're going to talk about the various functional groups. It'd be really helpful if you have out your reference tables, and we're going to be concentrating on Table R. We're going to start with the alcohols. And students often get overwhelmed when they're looking at the different functional groups, but your reference table is a really good tool. So I'm going to show you how to use it to the best of your ability so that you can get all these questions right when they come up on the Regents. So when we look at alcohols, what makes alcohols special is that they have a hydroxyl group or an OH functional group. So that's the first thing that you're going to be looking for. If you see something ending in an OH or it says the word alcohol, then you know that that's the class that it belongs to. Now, just like when we talked about branched hydrocarbons, the placement of the functional group will be important when we are naming it. In this first example here, you can see that you have one carbon, and one carbon means meth, and you have the OH group on one side of the C. In this case, it wouldn't matter where you put the OH group. So how we name this is actually, I want you to think of this as a hydrocarbon and go back and think of one C was methane. And then I just want you to drop the E and add the OL ending. So it becomes methanol. In the second one, you can see that we have two C's, and it wouldn't matter whether the OH was on the left or the right because we would number it so that it had the lowest group number. So this would be, if we go back to our alkane, ethane, drop the E, add the OL ending, so methanol. Now we get to 3 carbons, we have to say where that OH group is. So in this case, if we number from left to right or right to left, it wouldn't matter. Our functional group, our OH, is on the middle carbon, so we're going to use the number 2 to tell us where it is. And it came from propane, so we're just going to drop that E and add the OL ending. So this is 2-propanol. So it tells us that on the second carbon in a 3-carbon chain, because prop means 3, that there is an OH group. Now let's talk about these first 3 alcohols. Methanol is a wood alcohol, and it's actually very poisonous. You could die if you were to drink it. Ethanol is a grain alcohol, meaning these are the types of alcohols found in alcoholic beverages. And in large quantities, it could still be poisonous. And 2-propanol is actually has another name. Its formal name is isopropyl alcohol, and you'll learn why it's called iso if you take the next level class. And this is actually your rubbing alcohol that you can buy in pharmacies and use on sore muscles and things like that. Okay, so the last 2 alcohols I'm going to talk about are when we have multiple OH groups on the parent chain. So in this next example, you can see that I have 2 OH groups. So this is called a dihydroxy alcohol. Di meaning 2, hydroxy meaning OH groups. And in this case, we have to name where they are, but it's a little bit different, and let me explain. So you know that this came from ethane, all right? And we have locations on the first and second carbon. So there's our 1, 2. Now, previously, when we had multiple functional groups, we would say difluoro or trimethyl. But here, the 2, the di, comes in the middle of the name. So we're going to get rid of, remember how we did this? We would do ethanol, okay? But now in the middle of the name, we're going to put di for 2. So this is 1,2-ethanediol. And in the last one, you can see that we have 3 OH groups. So this is a trihydroxy. And we have them on the 1, 2, 3. There's 3 carbons, so this is propane. We're going to drop the E, put tri in the middle to indicate that there are 3 hydroxy groups. So 1, 2, 3 propranolotriol. This is commonly known as glycerol. Now, as far as the reagents goes, with dihydroxy and trihydroxy, the only thing that I've ever seen them do is ask you to, it might say in a multiple choice question, which one of the following is a dihydroxy alcohol? And they'll give you 4 different structures, and you have to pick the one with 2 OH groups. I've never seen them ask you to name a dihydroxy alcohol or draw a dihydroxy alcohol. I may have seen them years ago ask you to draw the trihydroxy alcohol, glycerol, and the only reason why this comes up is because you're going to learn later on that it's important in the process of making soap, which we're going to learn about in one of our organic reactions. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about the positioning of the functional group, only because I think it's important for you to be exposed to. I have not seen this on the reagents in probably a good 12 plus years. So if you want to go ahead and label this in your notes as non-reagents, that's fine. All this does, it tells us the difference between a primary, secondary, and tertiary alcohol. So very briefly, a primary alcohol is when the OH group is attached to a carbon. So right here, I'm going to draw this out bigger. So the OH group is attached to a carbon, and that carbon is attached to only one other carbon. That's primary. A secondary alcohol is when an OH group is attached to a carbon, and that carbon is attached to 2 other carbons. I'm going to make these a different color. And I guess by now you can figure out what a tertiary alcohol is, and that's when the OH group is attached to a carbon, and then that carbon is attached to 3 other carbons. As you can see in that picture. And I didn't draw the rest of the H's in. I'm just showing you as quickly as I can the difference between the primary, secondary, and tertiary alcohols. All right, let's move on to organic acids, which are very important. Organic acids, as you can see, have the functional group COOH, and there's a double bond in there, so when you draw it out, you have C double bond O, OH. And then the rest of your carbon chain is over here. One nice thing about organic acids is that the functional group always appears at the end of the carbon chain, so we don't have to use any numbers as to tell where the functional group is. So in this first one, you can see there's only one carbon, it's meth, and the functional group is right there. So again, all you're doing is taking your methane, which is your alkane, you're dropping your E and adding OIC. So this is methanoic, and then you just add the acid to the end to indicate that it contains the functional group COOH. In the second one, you can see that there's two carbons, so that is ethane. We drop the E, add oic, and then acid. Those are probably the easiest to name and draw because the functional group is always going to be on the last carbon. Again, you have an example in table R, so just follow the example and change the prefix for however many carbons you have in your chain. Next, we're moving on to aldehydes and ketones. And I'm going to start by telling you the only difference, okay? So the difference between aldehydes and ketones is the position of the double bonded oxygen. In an aldehyde, it's at the end. And in a ketone, it's somewhere in the middle. So their functional group is exactly the same, double bonded oxygen. Notice in an aldehyde, you can see it's at the end. Also notice that because it's a double bond, we don't need another H. We already have fulfilled the 4 bonds that carbon makes. The 2 with the double bonded oxygen, and then 1 each with the H's. To name it, all we do is add an AL ending. So the first one, we have methane, drop the E, add AL. Second one, we have ethane, we drop the E, add the AL. So we have ethanal and methanal. Whenever you see an AL ending, you know you have an aldehyde. And that's kind of cool because aldehyde begins with AL. You will not be asked, or will you have to know, the formal names of formaldehyde, which is used in the preservation of specimens, or acetaldehyde. Ketones, now your double bond appears somewhere in the middle of the chain. With a ketone, because it can appear somewhere in the middle of the chain, you would have to use a number depending on the length of the carbon chain to tell us where that double bonded oxygen is. Now the first one that they've done, here's an example, is propanone. A ketone ends in ONE, and so does ketone. In this one, you wouldn't need to tell me the number because prop has only 3 carbons. Therefore, in order for it to be in the middle, it would have to be on the middle carbon. Otherwise, if it was on the end, it would be an aldehyde. So we don't need a number with propanone. What I have seen them ask is what is the minimum number of carbons needed to make a ketone? And that answer is 3. You need a minimum of 3 carbons in order to make a ketone. Let's just do another example over here though. Let's say I had 4 carbons. So now I would have to give a location of this. So I would number this from left to right. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So my functional group is on my second carbon. So this would be 2-butanone. It ends in O-N-E because it's a ketone, and the 2 tells me the location of the double bonded oxygen. Next, we're going to talk about esters. Esters are the result of an alcohol and an organic acid reaction. And we're going to actually learn about this specific reaction in the second half of the unit that makes this compound. And I'm going to add a slide, and I'm going to talk about this on the next page because it'll be easier for me to draw it out. Okay, so the example that they gave you in your notes was pentyl ethanoate. And I'm going to show you how to dissect this. This is probably the most difficult compound because the way it's drawn and the way it's named is backwards. So let me explain. This part of the name on the right of the O came from the alcohol that was involved in the reaction that made it. It is drawn last, but it is named first. So the pent comes from the 5-carbon alcohol that made it, and the YL ending is added. The 2 C's before the O, right here, came from the organic acid that was involved in the reaction. So it was ethanoic acid. So the 2 C's is your ethan, and then you add the O8 ending. So this is the ending that makes it an ester. So it's drawn first, but named last. So for example, if I asked you to draw ethyl propanoate, knowing that, you know that the ethyl comes after the O. I'm going to do this in a different color. So here's my O in the middle. 2 C's, so I'm going to draw my 2 C's. And then I just put in my H's so that each carbon has 4 bonds. And then the prop, right, came from before the O. So I'm going to draw my 3 C's in. And I know that part of the functional group, there's a double bonded O there. And now I'm going to add my H's. This middle C doesn't get anything because it already has fulfilled the 4 bonds. And there is my ethyl, named first, drawn last, propanoate, named last, drawn first. So hopefully that helps clear esters up for you a little bit. And you'll get more practice than when we learn the reaction, which is called esterification, which actually combines the organic acid and the alcohol to make this. Okay, I'm going to give you permission to completely cross this out. We don't have to even talk about this. It's not going to come up. Let's move on to amines. Amines are formed by a nitrogen atom with 3 attached radicals. Now, normally it's the nitrogen attached to a carbon with 2 hydrogens. This functional group can travel on the chain, so you will need a number to indicate the position of where it's located on the molecule. So if we take this first example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a 4-carbon chain, and it's on the number 1 carbon because we would number this from right to left so that it has the lowest functional group. So this is 1 butane. We're going to get rid of that E and add amine. So this is 1 butanamine, or 1 butanamine. Let's just see another example if I were to move it. So here I have it on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't matter which way I number it from. It's still on the 3rd one. So this is 3. My parent chain is pent. So this is 3 pentanamine. Next we have amides. And amides are the result of a reaction between an ester, so notice that functional group right there, the double bonded O, an ester and an amine, which is that functional group there. And you wind up with an amide. Again, you do not need a number to tell the location because this is always going to be at the end. So you're technically looking for the double bonded oxygen and the NH2 group. And then you're just going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is got 4 carbons, which is bute. So this is butan. Get rid of that. And then it's amide. So this is butanamide. If I had 5 carbons, it would be pentanamide. 6 carbons, hexanamide. So you're just looking for that double bonded oxygen and the NH2 group. And your amino acids are the result of an amine combining with an organic acid. So again, you have 2 functional groups. You have the amine functional group, and you have the COOH organic acid functional group. Now, if you have your reference table out, you'll realize that amino acids are not on table R. Table R stops at amides. But you do have to realize that if you see these 2 functional groups together, the amine and the organic acid, just put them together, amino acid. And then soap. Soap is formed from a process called saponification. And you're reacting a base, a strong base, with fat. And you really only have to know anymore that saponification, which is the reaction, makes soap. We haven't seen them ask you to write the formula, recognize the reaction in a very long time. Okay, so you can pause the video for a minute and read how soap works, but basically, very quickly, it has a polar end and a non-polar end, and the polar end is what connects with the water, and the non-polar end connects with the fat, and it acts as a bridge to bridge them together. Let's talk about isomers. Isomers are really important. An isomer has the same molecular formula but a different structural formula. therefore different physical and chemical properties. So here you can see I have 3 C's, 6 H's, and an O, which is the exact same formula as methyl ethyl ether. All I did was separate the O from the H, put the O in between 2 C's, and make an ether. They have the same molecular formula, but they have different structures. They belong now to 2 different classes of compounds. One's an alcohol and one's an ether. Here's an example of how hexanoic acid, which has the molecular formula C6H12O2, forms the isomer butyl ethanoate, which is an ester, C6H12O2. Now, notice I still have a double bonded oxygen. You cannot change a double bond to a single bond. All you're doing is rearranging the atoms. Here we have an aldehyde, pentanal, C5H10O, and if I move that double bonded oxygen to the middle, I form a ketone, in this case 3-pentanone. So I also want to demonstrate how we can take a hydrocarbon and turn it into an isomer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is pentane. And when you take a straight chain and you form an isomer, you never want to take whatever C. So if I'm taking off the NC, I always want to put it somewhere in the middle. Don't put it on an end carbon, because then you are just bending the chain. It's still a straight chain. So I'm going to take it off and I'm going to put it in the middle, like right here. So now, if I number this, this now is 2-methyl butane. So these are isomers of one another, because this is C5H12 and this is also C5H12. And you're actually going to do a lab on the isomers of heptane. So what do you have to be able to do? Well, you have to be able to recognize what family a particular molecule belongs to. You have to be able to name simple examples of each kind of family. And you have to be able to draw isomers of different types of compounds. So here's some examples right here. I notice that right away that I've got a double bonded oxygen and I have an amine group. So this is, using table R, comes from an amide. Over here, I notice the C double bond OH right away. Using table R, I know this is an acid. It's propanoic acid. Over here, I notice the C double bond O in the middle, so this is an ester. Remember, the ending gives me the first part of the name, propyl, and the C before, meth, gives me the ending, methanoate, propylmethanoate. Here, I have an O in the middle of a chain, so this is an ether. So I simply name it. 1 is methyl, 3 propyl, methyl propyl ether. Here I have a double bonded oxygen in the middle of the chain. That's a ketone. I need to tell position. So this is 1, 2. So it's 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2-butanone. That about sums up functional groups.